Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. What's the most satisfying way to watch a Karen get exactly what she deserves? For me, it was watching my neighbor get arrested after she called the cops on me for a problem she created. This all started over a property line dispute, but it ended with her losing her house. Want to know how we did it? I've been wanting to share this story for a while now, but I had to wait until everything was completely resolved legally. It's a wild ride involving an entitled neighbor, property theft, police involvement, and ultimately justice being served in the most satisfying way possible. My wife and I bought our house about 6 years ago. It's nothing fancy, but it sits on about 2 acres of land in a semi-rural area. We have woods behind us, and when we first moved in, the property to our left was vacant. That vacant lot stayed empty for about 3 years, which was honestly pretty nice. We had privacy, quiet, and no drama. Then about 3 years ago, someone bought the lot next door and built a house. The construction took about 8 months, and during that time we didn't have any issues. We actually met the new neighbor briefly when she moved in. She seemed nice enough at first. I'll call her Karen because, well, she turned out to be the textbook definition of one. For the first few months, everything was fine. We'd wave when we saw each other, made small talk a couple of times, nothing substantial. Looking back, I think the problem started when she got more familiar with her own property and started looking at where her land ended and ours began. Our properties are separated by a natural tree line. It's not a perfectly straight line, but it's pretty clear where one property ends and another begins based on how the land was originally divided. We had never worried about the exact boundary because we weren't doing anything near it, and the previous lot was vacant anyway. One day I came home from work to find Karen in our backyard. Not near the property line, but actually about 20 feet onto our property. She was taking measurements and had a bunch of wooden stakes in her hands. I walked over and asked her what she was doing. She looked up and said, completely casually, that she was marking the property line. I was confused and told her that the property line was back where the tree line was. She smiled in this condescending way and said no, that she'd looked at her deed and the property line was actually where she was standing. I was taken aback. I told her that couldn't be right and that she was clearly on our property. She disagreed and said she'd done her research and knew where her property ended. She then told me that she'd be putting up a fence soon and wanted to make sure it was in the right place. I kept my cool and told her that before anyone put up any fences, we should probably get a professional survey done to make sure we knew exactly where the property line was. She said that wouldn't be necessary because she already knew where it was. I insisted that if there was any question about the boundary, a survey was the only way to settle it definitively. She clearly didn't like that idea, but she eventually agreed that we could each get surveys done. I told her that didn't make sense and would be a waste of money. One professional survey would give us both the answer. She seemed annoyed but didn't argue further. She took her stakes and left our property. That evening, my wife and I talked about it. We both thought it was weird and concerning. We decided to contact a surveyor right away because we didn't want this to escalate. We found a licensed surveyor who had good reviews and scheduled them to come out as soon as possible. The surveyor came out about a week later. They spent several hours on both properties, using professional equipment and checking against the original property records. When they were done, they showed us exactly where the boundary line was. It was almost exactly where we thought it was, right along that tree line. Karen's property line that she had tried to mark was a full 30 feet onto our land. The surveyor created an official survey map and placed iron survey markers every 50 feet or so along the entire boundary. These weren't just wooden stakes that could be moved. They were proper iron rebar markers set in concrete with orange caps on top, the official kind that surveyors use. The surveyor explained that these markers were the legal boundary indicators and that removing or tampering with them was actually illegal. We got the official survey documents, which included a detailed map and the surveyor's certification. We made copies and went over to Karen's house to show her. We were honestly trying to be neighborly about it. We figured we'd show her the professional survey, she'd see that she was wrong, and that would be the end of it. We were very wrong about that. When we showed Karen the survey, she barely looked at it. She said she didn't care what some surveyor said, she knew where her property line was. I tried to explain that this wasn't just someone's opinion. This was a licensed professional using the official property records and legal descriptions. She didn't want to hear it. My wife pointed out that the survey was consistent with both our deed and her deed, and that the surveyor had checked both. Karen said that the surveyor must have made a mistake or that we had somehow influenced them. That's when I started to realize we weren't dealing with a reasonable person. We left the copy of the survey with her anyway and told her that the markers were now in place and represented the legal boundary. She took the papers, but I could tell she had no intention of accepting them. Over the next few weeks, things got weirder. Karen would walk her property line regularly, but she'd always go past the survey markers onto our property. She'd walk around, take more measurements, and even started clearing some of the underbrush in the area she claimed was hers. I documented everything with photos and notes with dates. My wife suggested we get security cameras, and I agreed. We ordered cameras that day and had them installed within a week, 4 cameras covering the backyard and the disputed area. They were high-quality cameras with night vision and motion detection. The footage was stored both locally and backed up automatically, which would prove crucial for the legal case later. The cameras turned out to be one of the best investments we made. Within days, they caught Karen on our property multiple times. She wasn't just walking on our land, she was actively removing the survey markers. We watched footage of her literally digging up the concrete set iron markers and throwing them into the woods. I was working from home one afternoon when I got a motion alert from one of the security cameras. I checked the feed and saw Karen on our property again, but this time she wasn't alone. She had 3 other people with her and they were putting up a fence, not on the actual property line, but where she thought the property line was, about 30 feet onto our land. I immediately went outside. When I got there, I could see they had already set several fence posts and were working on more. I walked up and asked what was going on. Karen smiled at me and said she was putting up a fence on her property line, just like she told me she was going to do. I told her this wasn't her property line and that she needed to stop immediately. She said it was her property and she could do what she wanted. I pointed out the survey markers that were still visible, showing where the actual property line was. She said those markers were wrong and that she'd had them removed. I told her that removing survey markers was illegal and that she was currently trespassing and constructing a fence on my property. She said I was the one who was confused about the property line, not her. The 3 people helping her looked increasingly uncomfortable, especially when I mentioned that they were currently working on private property without the owner's permission. My wife had come outside too by this point. She asked the workers if Karen had shown them a survey or any legal documentation showing this was her property. They said no, that Karen had just hired them to build a fence and told them where to put it. I told them that this was not her property, that we had an official survey showing the real property line and that they were about to be involved in a legal dispute if they continued. One of the workers said they didn't want any trouble and that maybe they should see some documentation before continuing. Karen got angry and said they didn't need to see anything, that she was paying them and they should just do what she hired them to do. Then Karen did something that would prove to be her biggest mistake. She pulled out her phone and said she was calling the police herself. She said they'd confirmed that she was within her rights and that I was the one trespassing on her property. She literally called 911 right there in front of us, completely confident they would take her side. While she was on the phone with dispatch, explaining her version of events and demanding officers come deal with us for interfering with her legal property improvements, I pulled out my phone and started recording. My wife stood next to me, and we just waited. Karen told the dispatcher that we were harassing her, that we were trying to stop her from fencing her own land, and that we were trespassing. She was extremely animated, gesturing wildly while she talked. The workers had stopped working and were just standing there awkwardly. One of them quietly asked me if I really had a survey. I said yes and went inside to get the official survey documents. I brought them out and showed them. They looked at the survey, looked at where they'd been putting the fence, and you could see the realization hit them. They were clearly not happy with Karen at that point. 2 officers arrived about 40 minutes later. Karen had been checking her watch repeatedly, getting more agitated that they were taking so long. We just waited patiently on our own property. When the officers got there, Karen immediately started talking. She told them that we were on her property, that we were harassing her, and that we were trying to stop her from putting up a fence on her own land. She was talking fast and loud, barely taking a breath. One of the officers held up his hand and asked her to slow down. He then asked if anyone had any documentation about the property lines. I immediately said yes and showed him the official survey. He looked at it carefully, asked me a few questions about when it was done and who did it, and then asked to see the survey markers. We walked over to where the nearest marker was. The officer examined it, looked at the survey map, and then looked at where the fence posts were being set. The second officer was doing the same thing. It was pretty obvious to anyone looking that the fence was nowhere near the actual property line. The officer asked Karen if she had a survey or any documentation showing where she believed the property line was. She said she had her deed and had measured it herself. She went to her house and came back with her deed and a printout from some property records website that she had clearly manipulated or misread, with hand-drawn annotations showing where she thought the lines were. The officer looked at her papers and then at our professional survey. He asked her if she'd had a professional surveyor mark her property line. She said no, that she didn't need one because she'd figured it out herself. The officer explained that property descriptions and deeds can be technical and that without a professional survey, it's easy to misinterpret where boundaries are. Karen insisted she hadn't misinterpreted anything. The officer then pointed out that the professional survey we'd had done was the legal standard for determining property lines, and that according to that survey, the fence she was building was clearly on our property, not hers. That's when she absolutely lost it. She started screaming about how this was all a conspiracy, how we had bribed the surveyor, how the police were corrupt, and on and on. It was honestly shocking to watch an adult have such a complete meltdown. The officer held up his hand and told her firmly to calm down, or he would have to ask her to leave. She didn't calm down, she kept screaming and then made the fatal error of taking a step toward the officer while jabbing her finger in the air near his face. The officer stepped back and told her she needed to step back immediately. She didn't. He gave her one more clear warning, telling her that if she took another step toward him while acting aggressively, he would arrest her for disorderly conduct. She yelled that he had no right to threaten her and moved even closer. That's when he arrested her. She screamed and resisted, which just made things worse. They ended up charging her with disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. She was handcuffed and put in the back of the police car, still screaming about how this was all unfair and we had somehow orchestrated the whole thing. After she was in the car, the officer came back and talked to us. He said we should document everything, keep copies of all our interactions, and consider getting a restraining order if she continued to harass us. He also said we should take photos of the fence posts she'd had installed on our property, and that we had every right to remove them since they were on our land. The workers had already packed up and left at that point. I felt bad for them since they'd just been trying to do a job, but I was also glad they'd seen what was happening and stopped before they built more of the fence. Over the next few days, we removed all the fence posts Karen had had installed. We documented everything with photos and saved all the security camera footage. We also contacted a lawyer because it was clear this wasn't over. Our lawyer sent Karen a cease and desist letter demanding that she stop trespassing on our property and stop interfering with the survey markers. The letter also informed her that we were documenting everything and would pursue legal action if necessary. She ignored it completely. In fact, she doubled down. She replaced the survey markers she'd removed with her own wooden stakes again. She continued to go onto our property, and she started telling other neighbors that we were the ones trying to steal her land. We filed a civil lawsuit against her for trespassing, property damage, for removing the survey markers, and harassment. We also filed for an injunction to stop her from coming onto our property. Before the civil trial, she filed one more motion through her lawyer, a claim that she had acquired rights to the land through adverse possession. For those who don't know, adverse possession is a legal concept where if someone openly uses someone else's land for a long enough period of time without the owner objecting, they can potentially gain legal ownership of that land. Her claim was absurd. She'd only lived there for a few months, and adverse possession requires continuous use for years, usually at least 10 years depending on the state. Plus, we'd objected immediately and repeatedly. Her lawyer had to have known it was a losing argument, but I guess he had to try something. The case took about 7 months to actually get to court. During that time, there were pretrial hearings, discovery, and multiple attempts by her lawyer to get her to settle. When we finally had our day in court, watching her try to defend her position in front of a judge was almost painful. She represented some of her own arguments against her lawyer's advice because she was convinced she was right. She brought in her hand-marked maps and tried to explain to the judge how she'd calculated the property line. The judge asked her if she had any surveying experience or training. She said no, but that she'd done her research online. Our lawyer presented the professional survey, the surveyor's testimony, the documentation of her removing survey markers, the security footage of her trespassing, the police reports from when she was arrested, and testimony from the workers who'd been there when she tried to build the fence. The judge ruled in our favor on all the major points. We didn't get 100% of what we asked for. The judge reduced some of the damages amounts and struck a couple of the minor claims, but we won on everything that mattered. Karen was ordered to pay for our legal fees, the cost of the survey, the cost of replacing the survey markers she'd removed, damages for trespassing and harassment, and court costs. The total amount came to just over $47,000 when we added everything up. The judge also issued a permanent injunction barring her from coming onto our property for any reason and from interfering with the survey markers. He stated clearly for the record where the legal property line was and that any future disputes about it would be decided based on the professional survey we'd had done. Karen looked absolutely shell-shocked when the judgment was read. I don't think she'd actually believed she could lose. But here's where it gets even better and why this really is pro-revenge territory. After the judgment, Karen had 30 days to pay. She didn't pay. We went back to court and the judge allowed us to place a lien on her property. Essentially, she couldn't sell or refinance her house without paying us first. She tried to fight the lien, but that went nowhere. She tried to appeal the original judgment, but that also went nowhere because her case had no merit. Finally, about a year after the original judgment, she was forced to sell her house to pay the judgment. We found this out because we got a notice about the sale due to the lien. The house sold and we got our money from the proceeds. Karen moved away and we never heard from her again. The new neighbors who bought her house are absolutely lovely. We met them before they closed on the house and showed them the survey and explained the whole situation. They were understanding and actually thanked us for being upfront about it. They've respected the property line completely and we've had zero issues. The cherry on top? Because of Karen's arrest and the court case, she ended up with a criminal record for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Those were separate criminal charges from the civil case. She pleaded no contest to them, probably on advice from her criminal lawyer, because fighting them would have been pointless given that everything was recorded by the police body cameras. So in the end, Karen's absolute insistence that she was right, her refusal to accept a professional survey, her decision to call the police herself thinking they'd side with her, and her aggressive behavior toward the officer cost her tens of thousands of dollars, a criminal record, and eventually her house. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting someone's own actions catch up with them. We didn't have to do anything unreasonable or questionable, we just defended our property rights through proper legal channels, documented everything, and let Karen's own behavior speak for itself. The whole experience taught me a lot about dealing with unreasonable people and the importance of documentation. Those security cameras were worth their weight in gold. The professional survey was worth every penny. And having a good lawyer who knew exactly how to handle this kind of dispute was invaluable. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if Karen had just accepted the survey results from the beginning. She could have lived in that house peacefully and none of this would have happened. But she was so absolutely convinced she was right, so unwilling to even consider that she might be wrong, that she destroyed her own life over it. My wife and I occasionally still talk about it when we're sitting in our backyard. The backyard that we now know without any doubt is completely and legally ours. We can see the survey markers from where we sit, and they remind us of the crazy saga we went through. But mostly we just enjoy the peace and quiet, and our new neighbors who understand what property lines are. If there's a moral to this story, it's this. If you're in a property dispute with a neighbor, get a professional survey done immediately. Don't rely on your own measurements or interpretations. And if you're the one who's wrong, accept it gracefully before you end up like Karen, losing everything because you couldn't admit a mistake. The next one is a malicious compliance story. This story is about when I worked as a machinist. I had a horrible boss. I just realized that I could end the story there and a bunch of you would relate. Anyways, this boss was the owner's brother-in-law, someone who never had management experience, but rather someone put in a position because relative equals good worker. There are so many examples of what made him horrible, which I won't go into in this post, but this man checked a bunch of boxes. We'll call him Butthole, or BH for short. I had worked there for 6 years at the point of this story. It was the week of my review, and I had been unusually nice to him this week. This was also right after one of the sales guys had come over. I was having a chat with BH, and a sales guy came up. You know, I was going through the numbers over the years, and do you realize that over the years of OP being here, the amount of rework coming out of his area has dropped and profits are up about 400% over the guy he replaced. He started talking some more and BH cut him off and gave him a look. Sales guy looked at me and back to BH and then walked away. I knew I had some info that I wasn't supposed to know, and he knew I knew. Eventually, I was called in for my review. There were 4 pages of categories scored 1 to 10. It was very routine. All my scores were very good, and in turn, I was feeling good. We finished that up, and I signed it as stating I was in agreeance. He slid it to the side and pulled out a totally different piece of paper. Now that the review for the company is over, this is stuff about you I have noticed. The piece of paper outlined that I spent too much of my time socializing with others, which significantly reduced my productivity. It also stated I spent too much time in the bathroom and needed to adjust my diet so I would refrain from using the bathrooms at work. He had broken this into 3 neat paragraphs, and I do not remember the exact wording. I was floored. I had gone through years of medical crap and even surgeries with my gut. He knew this. Also, if my machine is spinning and making chips, I can talk and pay attention to the normal sounds coming out of my machine without affecting productivity. We got into a heated argument. He was adamant that I was wasting time in the bathroom. I argued that if I go in there and stuff comes out of me, then the bathroom was needed. He said that he had no proof of me actually using the bathroom. I offered to stop flushing and everyone else would alert him of what I did in there for me. Everything he said, I had a retort. At one point, I got so pissed off, I walked out of his office and yelled, "Keep your raise, just don't presenting talk to me anymore." Then he yelled that if I didn't come back, he would fire me for insubordination. I went back in and just stared. He talked for another 20 minutes without me saying a thing. It was a 2% raise, which was decent for current market rates, and I left and went back to work. It's at this point a bunch of people are going to comment about common sense stuff like how illegal half of this is and what I should be doing about it. I will point out that I am very neurodivergent and very smart, but sometimes lack that sense because of how my brain is wired. I decided to just do what he said. I got subscriptions for Audible and YouTube and wore earbuds literally 100% of the time. I stopped talking to everyone. If someone came up to me and asked WTF, I would state my time at work is for working and not for talking. I got deep into listening to Roll20 and discovered a bunch of authors and books I love to this day. As for the bathroom, I adjusted my diet. I would get home from work and eat one meal immediately that would hold me over until I got what I needed. I called my doctor and told him about my review. My doctor also had some fun words about my boss. I got to drop by and pick up a doctor's note that read, paraphrased, "Due to human nature, this note is to state that OP can use the bathrooms at work when needed." This is also when I found out that HR had no idea about what was going on, as she was like, "What's this for? Of course you're allowed to poop at work." She said she'd look into it. I never heard back. So, no talking to anyone for good productivity, and I had a doctor's excuse for the other thing. He got mad at me daily at this point. Instead of yelling my name to get my attention, he had to walk over and wave to get my attention. Frankly, I heard him half the time, but knew it pissed him off to come over, so I ignored him. He would always point out that it would be easier for him if he could get my attention. I would point out that the handbook says these are allowed and they prevented me from socializing, which he didn't allow. A few weeks of this and he pulls me into his office, states that people keep asking him why I won't socialize to people and it's making him uncomfortable. I state it's not making me uncomfortable, that they're his orders, and I have noticed an increase in productivity, so it's working. Did he want me to be less productive? No? Okay, BH, I'll go back to work. You can't order me to socialize with people, especially after ordering me not to socialize with people. I'm not sorry that it makes you uncomfortable that I'm enjoying my book. I continued this for a whole year before I put in my 2 weeks just before my 7-year anniversary and enacted my revenge. I hope you enjoyed this story. There will be more stories of BH and my revenge later. The next one is an entitled People Story. My mother, who is 41, wants to move back in with me and my siblings. I am 20, and I will try to keep this short. Basically, my mother and my stepdad got divorced in November of 2020 because he caught her texting another guy. It was messy, and he ended up leaving that same night. We did not hear from him for a few months, which I do not blame him for because he was going through a lot of betrayal and needed time to process everything. He is still very supportive and takes care of us kids. I am only calling him my stepdad for the sake of the story, but I consider him my real dad. My biological father was barely in the picture, and my stepdad took me in as his own when I was a baby. So, he is my dad. That is relevant because some people might assume I am not close with him, but I am. He is the best, and I love him. He treats me like his own child. After the divorce, my mother left and moved in with the guy she had been texting. She left all 4 of us siblings at home with no parental supervision, and it has been that way ever since. She became really horrible to us after she moved in with him. She treated us like we were a burden and sometimes acted like we did not even exist while she played mommy to his younger kids. My older sibling and I had to step up and take care of everyone. I helped as much as I could until I was legally an adult, and then continued helping after that. When she left, all she said was, "There are more than enough of you to rely on each other, and you'll get it when you're older and have children of your own." Personally, I would not abandon my kids for an abusive guy, but maybe that is just me. Sarcasm, obviously. She would come back sometimes, but only for a day or two to pick up clothes or when she and the guy got into a fight. Then she would go right back to him, and he lives 3 to 4 hours away. A few months ago, we got into a huge argument after she and the guy broke up, and he kicked her out for what felt like the billionth time. She tried to guilt us by saying things like, "Kids need their moms." I told her something along the lines of, "When did you care about that 5 years ago when you left us and claimed we would understand when we were older? We are older now, and we still do not understand how a woman can do that to her kids." After that, she got mad, and the argument really started. She said some awful things about me and my siblings that I will not repeat here, but just know they were things a mother should never say to her children. It ended with her going to stay with our grandparents and texting my older sibling and me guilt trips while playing the victim. My grandparents told us to block her, but spoiler alert, she went right back to him a few days later. After that, my older sibling took her to court for custody of our younger siblings and the house. They told her that if she did not peacefully hand over custody of the kids and put the house in their name, they would expose her in court and tell everyone what she had been doing. I know blackmail is not right, but it worked. My mother gave the house and custody of the younger kids to my older sibling and claimed to be an unfit parent. That was it. Now, she and the guy have apparently broken up for good. He has thrown out all her things, she got a new phone number, and she called my older sibling asking if she could have her room back in the house. She said she would never leave us again. We have already turned her old room into the youngest sibling's room, and our youngest likes having her own space. Obviously, we told her no. That is when my mother started playing the victim card and tried turning everything around on us. She said we were mean and that she had done everything for us kids. She also claimed that our dad turned us against her. We told her our dad does not even talk about her anymore unless we bring her up. Then she got angry and called us ungrateful brats again. She said we should be thanking her for giving us the house and not throwing us out like she wanted to. Then she demanded that we let her move in and said she was not taking no for an answer. She said she raised us, that she was still the mother, and that she had the final say. We told her that if she tried anything, we would get the police involved. So far, that has not stopped her. She said she is going to try to move in sometime tomorrow. All she said was, "We'll talk in person about this. See you soon. Love you." Honestly, I do not even know what to do if she actually shows up. I really hope she does not go through with it because I do not want to get the police involved, but so far that looks like where this is going. Today, thanks to some advice, we changed the locks. Anyway, thank you for watching.